Okay, I'm going to open the meeting. Okay, thank you all for being here. It's 10 o'clock. I'm going to open the public hearing for SB 537. Our chairman is engaged in another business, so he'll be delayed a bit. So I'm Jim Qualey, the vice chairman. So the public hearing for SB 537 is open. Senator Susi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman,
Okay,
members.
I've just been reminded by our helpful clerk. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm so excited. I forgot the Pledge of Allegiance.
Very good.
Thank you. See?
Sorry. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
My apologies, Senator.
Not at all. Happy to participate.
Thank you very much for being here.
Certainly, and I can verify that the chair is in Senate election law at the moment, but is probably going to be coming back up. For the record, I'm Donna Susi. I represent Senate District 18, which is comprised of the town of Litchfield and wards 5 through 9 in the city of Manchester. And I sponsored this bill at a request of the Clerks Association, but in particular, my city clerk, Matt Normand, who's the clerk in Manchester. The bill has changed a bit since I originally introduced it. There are a couple issues that I will point out to you, and I think the clerks may echo those concerns as well, but essentially, the issue is twofold. It attempts to achieve two goals. Number one is to allow for pre-processing for the management of workflow for city and town clerks. As we know, particularly the presidential elections, there were a number of absentee ballots cast. Having a public process, which to me is critical, allowing for that pre-processing does two things. As I first mentioned, it would alleviate some of the time spent on election day trying to mark a checklist and processing those ballots, which does take significant amount of time depending on how many are being processed. But the second issue is if the pre-processing is done in advance of election day, to the extent the voter has provided contact information beyond just their address, phone number, or email, which is optional, but if they've provided it, it does give an opportunity for voters who have made a mistake, either not signed the envelope or have left the ballot outside, an opportunity to cure their ballot. So those were the two goals we were hoping to achieve with the legislation. There are a couple things, as I said, that I would note that are different from the original version that the clerks will probably speak to. But one is about the ballot curing. The bill as amended now mandates that the clerk schedule 2 dates to open absentee ballots. The original legislation was just one. And to the extent they have to cure, I think the clerks are looking for a little more precise direction as to what that means. In many cases, it's picking up the telephone or it's sending out an email. I think some of that could be addressed in the election manual, but I think we want to make sure that there's uniformity in that process. We also, I think, wanted to make this optional. In a place like Manchester, the volume is a little different than in some of our other towns. It may be more manageable. We wanted to make it optional so that it is a tool. We have done the process before in Manchester. We did during the 2020 elections when the legislation was for that specific election cycle. The logistics were a bit tough, but I think everything worked relatively well. However, there was a cost associated with doing it because, wow,
Yeah.
We have 12 wards, quite the weather, 12 wards, and it was done all in one place. So it required a rental and some other logistical concerns. But by and large, I'm happy to respond to any questions about specific parameters of the bill. But I do think I would ask that you do consider making it optional so that it is an important tool, and that there be some language that if election officials are directed to cure, that be included in the election manual that is prepared by the Secretary of State. With that, I'd conclude my testimony and be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thank you very much. Do we have questions from the committee? Representative Wood?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. I'm a little confused here. We're talking about mandating 2 days and making it optional. What are you looking at making it optional?
So thank you, Representative Wood. As I said, the bill originally was proposed as optional. When it got amended, the amendment, which was prepared by Senator Gray, that I did go along with, had a requirement that there be 2 dates. What I was explaining is that was not what I had been asked to do by the Clerks Association. So to the extent, they will provide more input, that's something that I think we might want to go back to. But I do want to represent what I was directed to do.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, thank you. So, it seems like it was brought across as a mandate. I don't understand why we would mandate all the towns to do something like this. So I'm just stuck with what I'm reading right now.
I understand.
And having a problem with that completely. So that's why I'm bringing it up twice. Sorry. And you did a good job explaining where you're on it. But why was it felt, if you can help me on this? Thank you.
I don't want to speak for Senator Gray. As I said, he did draft the amendment. I think his ultimate goal is to ensure that as many people who do cast absentee ballots can participate in the process. So by mandating a cure section, it means that many more ballots potentially get counted, to the extent a voter is able to cure whatever deficiency there might be. Mm-hmm.
Do we have any other questions from, I recognize Representative Lane.
Thank you, Senator Susi. There was a mention about handwriting analysis, that this bill might be flipping us back to handwriting analysis. Could you speak to that?
Sure. I think you're referring, there is language about signature
Right.
that is on page 5 of the bill. Compare the signature on. That's language that I personally think should be removed. It's existing language. There is no intent to, the bill as drafted and as amended does not revert back to signature comparison. I think there was litigation.
Right.
We were directed to suspend that practice
Right.
because it was perceived to be disenfranchising voters. I don't think this legislation as drafted in any way goes back to that,
Okay.
but it doesn't delete the language that had the signature requirement
Okay.
from the past.
Yeah. Can I follow up? Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. My concern is that we then again pass the bill that has that in it. Are we sending a message to the courts that we're trying to override their decision? I don't know. That was just a concern that I had. I didn't know if you shared it or not.
I think that's a reasonable concern. As I say, I think
Okay.
my personal preference would be to eliminate that
Okay.
provision. But if you look, it starts on page 4, it's section 7. You can see what the amendments are, which is to strike through open the envelope and instead replace it with process absentee. And then when you get to the next page, the signature language was what was already there.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry about that. Just doing double duty. Actually, it was just at your committee.
We were switching, Mr. Chairman.
And I'm going right back down in a minute. So, Any other further questions from the committee?
I have
Yes,
I have
Representative
one
Lane.
more. I'm sorry, I
Sure.
have one more question. In here, it's mandated for 2 days, and would it be better for cities or towns that don't have that many to have the option of up to 2? Or, I mean, was there a specific reason 2 was selected?
Yeah, that was the question that Representative Wood asked me. So my bill, as originally drafted, did have the option of doing pre-processing. In order to get a unanimous vote out of the Senate on the legislation, the amendment was drafted to require it. The reasoning behind requiring it, for those that supported it, was to ensure that as many deficient ballots that would not have been able to be counted could be cured in advance. That was the reasoning for it, so.
Yes.
Thank you. But there was no specific reason why 2 was picked? I mean, because many could do it in 1. Was that a change? I'm sorry if you've already answered that. I'm not following. Yeah.
I didn't answer the question as to 2, and honestly, I can't speak to it. I can just tell you that it was the committee chair's preference. It was Senator Gray's preference that there be 2.
Are there further questions from the committee? Oh, yes, Representative Hamer.
Thank you. If an error is found when we open up the ballots, the affidavit is not signed or something, how do we contact the people?
So that's the question that I think would need to be addressed in the election manual so that there is a uniform process. Right now, we request, but it is optional, information including telephone number and email address. Those would be the methods by which you could contact a voter. And if you're pre-processing, there's time to do that. I think the clerks can give you more specificity as to the process they used during COVID when they did a lot more of this. But I think the concept would be to include direction in the election law manual provided by the Secretary of State.
Further questions from the committee? Okay, last call for questions from the committee. Seeing none, thank you very much, Senator, for speaking with us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Okay, next person up to testify is Linda Bundy. Thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. Representative Quayle and other members of House Election Law, my name is Linda Bundy. I'm from Antrim, and I support SB 537, allowing the processing of absentee ballots. My town clerk and moderator are in favor of allowing pre-processing of absentee ballots. During the 2020 elections, they encountered a number of ballots with inner envelopes that had errors or omissions. In each instance, they were able to contact the voter, who then came and completed the envelope correctly. The voters were pleased and grateful for this opportunity that ensured their votes would be counted. With larger towns and cities, in addition to providing voters a way to cure their ballots, pre-processing can make counting the ballots on Election Day more efficient for election workers. The Senate House Election and Municipal Affairs Committee unanimously voted this bill OTP, and the full Senate approved it by a voice vote. I ask that you do the same and vote ought to pass on SB 537. Thank you.
Well, thank you. You available to take questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, are there any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for
Thank you.
speaking with us.
Thank you.
Okay, next person to testify, Tina. Okay, thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, committee. My name is Tina Guilford. I'm the town clerk in Derry. I was the moderator in Derry in 2020. We pre-processed ballots for the November election, and it went great. This gave residents the opportunity to come in and cure defaults. Many people forget to sign the envelope. It is probably one of the number one reasons for an absentee ballot being rejected. I supported this bill in the Senate. I testified in support of it, and I still support it. I do, however, have a couple of concerns. When the bill was originally introduced, it addressed RSA 659:49. There's two things in that part of the statute. And that part of the statute specifically says that that ballot processing shall begin at 1 p.m. unless at a different time that is no earlier than 2 hours after the opening of the polls. However, this part says that you may open absentee ballot outer envelopes on election day at any time after the opening of the polls. So I think we have two statutes in conflict. Also, the original bill removed Part 2 of RSA 659:49, which upon the written challenges of 10 or more voters who are present at the polls no later than 1 p.m., the committee pre-processed these ballots. So again, I think there is a little bit of conflict here, and I think that's something that you need to address. My other largest issue is that there are a couple of different spots in here that state, for example, on page 3, line 22, absentee ballots returned to the town or city clerks in person shall not be required to be placed in such outer envelopes, which is great. We can save some trees. My problem is that has anyone sometimes tried to decipher a signature to see who that ballot belongs to? And my concern is that we attach the application to the envelope. I don't know how other towns do it, but we paperclip it because we don't want to staple it. We don't want to put any holes through the absentee ballot that's inside that affidavit envelope. Well, all you need is the box to knock over, and now all of a sudden everything separates, and now you really don't know which one goes to which without sitting there and examining signatures. It's a lot easier with the name and address on the outer envelope. I'm okay with not having the outer envelope. What I would love is if on the backside of the affidavit envelope, there were pre-printed lines where people could put their name and address, so that way it would be easier to keep it all organized in case for some reason they become separated from the application. I'm just thinking about a real world issue. There are some other questions about curing the defaults and what have you. Hopefully that would all be addressed by the election procedure manual. As to whether we would need to issue a second absentee ballot and all of that. But hopefully that would be addressed in the election procedure manual. And I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? Representative Wary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for taking my question. Approximately how many ballots, percentage-wise or quantity-wise, were needed to be cured in that manner?
So I looked real quick at the presidential primary. We had about 10% that were rejected, and half of them were because they were missing a signature.
And what percentage of that half were you able to?
Oh, so you're talking about in 2020. That's when we last pre-processed.
Okay.
So going back to 2020, of the ballots we rejected in pre-processing, a good 60% of them were cured. We pre-processed on the Thursday and Friday prior to election day, and our clerk had hours on Saturday and Sunday for absentee ballots, and we had people come in. In fact, we were on TV during the pre-processing. I know there are news stations, you can probably Google it. We actually had people, because we were actively calling them as we were getting the rejections, and we had people come in person while we were pre-processing to fix their ballots. So it was, a lot of people were able to cure their default, and were able to vote and have their ballot counted.
Another follow-up? Yes.
And I'd like to just touch on the suggestion you made with regard to the backside writing of the name and address on the application envelope. Do you have any concerns with voter privacy or privacy of the vote if that's done? That somehow in people opening up the envelope, they might see and then
So normally when you're processing an absentee ballot, you're opening the outer envelope, which has their name and address on it. You announce their name, and then you pull it out, and then you open the second envelope. I mean, it's all done at the same time. So the information's already there.
Okay.
And the people who are processing them are doing so off a list that also has their information.
Further questions from the committee? I do have a question and a follow-up. Thank you for taking my question. When you say curing the ballot, I presume you meant curing the affidavit.
Yes, curing the default, whatever that default may be.
And a follow-up to that, you mentioned that you were able to fix quite a number of those. What percentage of the affidavits you tried to get in contact with the voter, what percentage could you not get in contact with? Roughly.
There were probably 4 or 5 that did not give us any contact information, be it a phone number or an email, because those things are optional on the application. So if they don't put it on the application, then we have no way really of getting in quick contact with them. This was also only a few days before the election. You know, there are, you know, the clerk processing that they're talking about is, you know, you can do it as early as 3 weeks prior to the election. So that would give a lot of time. As a clerk, I could mail the resident a letter and they would hopefully get it and still be able to come in. And a lot of the people who voted absentee and had an issue, and it's the missing signature, or they don't send the affidavit envelope back at all. Some of those people could not come in when we did the pre-processing because they were traveling. They were not here anymore. So, and I had a few people be like, well, it's not like I can come and fix it now. I'm in wherever.
Right.
I'm sorry. I tried.
Okay. Well, thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next person to testify, Olivia Zink. Well, we've seen you a number of times in our committee.
Good morning, members of the Election Law Committee. For the record, my name is Olivia Zink, a voter in Franklin, and represent Open Democracy, a nonpartisan nonprofit here in Concord. It's really important that we listen to the election workers who really like this idea of opening the outer envelopes and making sure we're correcting ballots that a voter may have made a mistake. It's not a common practice for them to understand what these affidavits mean. Did they sign the left side? Did they sign the right side? In 2020, when we had pre-processing, it did save a lot of time on election day. 39 states permit some sort of pre-processing or opening of the outer envelopes. And I think it's really important. This is a nonpartisan measure to lessen the strain of election works and speed up the time of tallying and making sure our ballots are secure and accurate. I also have testimony from our public policy fellow who's a college student, and oftentimes college students are voting And I think it's also important for, many of the college students may not have read the 400 pages of election law and understand it all. And so they might need, some of them might have read the 400 pages of the manual, but some of them may have not. And they don't know all of the ins and outs on how to do them. And so, we could also address this by making sure the instructions are as clear. And I just also wanted to point out that this also talks about on page 4, line 20, for voters that are blind and voting with a disability. And I do think that voters with disabilities, especially print disabilities, have trouble knowing where to sign on those applications. So assistance is required for those voters. And with that, I'm happy to take good questions.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any questions from the committee? I see none, so thank you very much for your testimony. Next, Dan Healy. And thank you for being here today.
Hi, Dan Healy, representing the New Hampshire City and Town Clerks Association, where I'm the current president. So our association, we don't want to be mandated to have the pre-processing. Some clerks like doing it, some, we want the option. So the original bill had the option. I think this bill, the amendment changes that a little bit. And the other concern that I've heard, which Tina spoke on, was the curing. So there needs to be a specific process outlined for the curing of the absentee ballots. If a resident they're in Florida and they send their absentee ballot to us and they don't have the signature, what is our process? Are we sending them the ballot back for them to sign it? Are we sending them a new ballot? I think that needs to be spelled out. So the election procedure manual is recommendations from the state, but I think that it should be outlined what the actual process is. That's one of the concerns I've heard from another clerk during this process. My personal opinion on the bill is that I spoke in favor of the original bill in the Senate. I believe the original bill that was proposed by Senator Soucy accomplished everything that the Clerks Association wanted. And I believe the original bill, without any of the amendments, is superior to the current bill. And I'd be open to any questions.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions from the committee? Thank you. Yes, Representative Brennan.
Thank you. Is it your understanding that the procedures that you would like to be outlined for you, is it your understanding that that needs to be written into statute, or is it sufficient to have it in the election procedural manual issued by the Secretary of State's office?
So, I mean, I would like a procedure written. The election procedure manual, what it is, if it's not in law, it's guidance from the state. So it's not required to then do it that way. It's more of it's a guidance from Secretary of State's office. So if it's in law, that's what we need to do. So if you have it as a procedure, clerks could have their own procedure for curing the ballot. I think something should be spelled out for the clerks to make it so everyone's doing the same thing and there's no issues with the process.
Follow up, please.
Yes.
Thank you. Does that run contrary to the clerk's position of not wanting a mandate for the pre-processing? So as in, the position of the Clerks Association was that this amendment makes it mandated that pre-processing occurs. But if there is a procedure outlined in the statute, does that not make it a mandatory procedure? And are those two things in conflict?
They wouldn't be in conflict. So if a clerk chose to do the pre-processing, that's when they'd see that inner envelope and they'd realize if the the voter didn't sign it. But if they're not doing the pre-processing, they wouldn't then see that envelope until election day. So you wouldn't be opening the outside envelope to then see the affidavit envelope until election day unless there was pre-processing.
Yes, Representative Lane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Healy, for testifying. Did the original bill have those cure provisions in it? And I have not read the original bill. I apologize.
I don't believe it did. That's something that's come up over the last few weeks, talking with some of the other clerks, especially the larger communities that get a significant amount of absentee ballots, that if they were to pre-process, they want to know what they're going to do with that ballot. I mean, should they be mailing a completed ballot back to someone just for a signature, or should we be mailing a new ballot altogether? Like, what should we be doing? Some of the residents, I mean, they're local, they just can't be there on election day, so they can come in, they could sign it. But if we're mailing it, if we have to mail back a completed ballot, is that something that we should be doing, say, sending it to Florida, a ballot that's already filled out, back to the voter?
May I have a follow-up? May I have a follow-up?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. If we put, say, like skeletal cure stuff and then leave it to the Secretary of State to kind of elaborate on those, would that be something that, I mean, they could provide the guidance that you wanted around the skeletal provisions that we put in?
I think that would be a good option. I think clerks are just looking for some type of guidance on what they would have to do to cure the ballots.
Yes, Representative Berry.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I'm in and out. Our friends in the Senate got me getting my steps in today. I missed questions. So have you addressed the mandatory part of this bill and the Clerks Association stance on it being a forced requirement?
I spoke on it briefly. Tina also, Derrytown clerk, spoke on this. We're not in favor of mandating it. So we would like an option for the clerks to decide if that's what they want to do in their community, if it makes sense for them to pre-process or not to pre-process. So we're not, our association's not in favor of a mandate. We do like having the option to pre-process.
Any other questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Wary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Healy, for taking my question. Just to clarify, what's the decision-making process then that the clerks are looking for in terms of whether to pre-process or not? Is there, it's almost a follow-up to Representative Brennan's question, is trying to understand the rationale for what the clerks are when the clerks are just choosing to make a pre-processing event or not, and understanding how then, if you want that sort of specificity and regulations, what do we need to do to accomplish that? So I'm just trying to, if you'll bear up with my questioning, understand this a little better so that we can make sure we get the best possible bill here.
Yes, so I think it depends on the volume. So in 2020, when I was in Derry, we had around 7,000 absentee ballots. So to be able to pre-process at that time was extremely helpful. When you have a town election and we're at 100 ballots, it's not really going to save us much time on election day to pre-process those 100. So I think it really depends on the quantity and the availability of people to come in and actually do the pre-processing and all that. But I think it more ties with the quantity. Looking at the records in Nashua, they had around 15,000 absentee ballots in 2020. So I mean, that was beneficial to them. It would be a few thousand per ward, which takes a significant amount of time. So to be able to get a start on processing them prior to the election was was helpful. But, you know, for our municipal election, when we only have a couple hundred absentee ballots spread out across the whole city, it's not really a time saver when it comes to election day.
Further questions? Representative Rafter, yes.
Thanks. Thanks for taking my question. I think we all understand why the mandate is a kind of a burden, but if it's optional, don't we end up with some towns doing it, some towns not? So voters across the state are not treated equally. They're being processed based on what town they live in. Shouldn't we have a consistent approach across the state to treat all voters equally?
Yeah, that is a good point. I believe in 2020, it wasn't mandated across the state. I think it was an option for the pre-processing in 2020. So some communities took advantage of it and some didn't.
Yes, Representative Berry.
So we keep talking about 2020. What about 2022? What have the numbers done since 2020? Because 2020 was an anomaly. So what do they look like now?
I would say our best comparison is going to be this upcoming year. In the midterm years, it's not an even comparison. I want to say we had around 3,000 absentee ballots in Nashua for the midterm. In 2020, we had 15,000. The big comparison is going to be coming up in November to see how many we have now that we're out of that.
Yes, Representative Berry may have a follow-up.
Yeah, so I a little question there. You say it's not comparable, but we're talking about the percent of the votes cast being absentee ballot, not the total number. So wouldn't directly comparable be like 2016? I would also say that 2022 is directly comparable. It was a statewide general election with federal elections on the ballot. And while we can have a conversation about the gross number, the percentage is what matters. So what was the percentage of absentee ballots cast in 2022? And how does that justify us bringing in this COVID change forever?
I don't have that number off the top of my head. I can tell you that in 2016 in Derry, there were about 1,200 absentee ballots for presidential election. And in 2020, there were about 7,000. So I guess would be the best comparison on, you know, the difference, the increase, because of COVID and all that, the jump in absentee ballots. I don't expect to get as many as we did in 2020 for absentee ballots. That's my personal opinion. I think the absentee numbers are going to go down a little bit. I don't know what that number is going to be. But I want to say, without having the numbers in front of me, in 2022 in Nashua, I want to say we had around 3,000, when in 2020 we had about 15,000.
Go ahead.
So couldn't we compare like the First in the Nation presidential primary? Because neither of those have happened during COVID. So neither of those had the real change. So couldn't we look at those numbers? So couldn't we look at 2024 First in the Nation primary and compare it to, say, 2016 or even 2020?
I could look at my numbers for the presidential primary. That again it's not as high of a turnout. You have a lower percentage of voters turning out for that election. In 2020, I think we're closer to like 90%. In presidential primary, it wasn't anywhere near that. So it's tough. It's hard to compare different election types to each other for absentees. It has to kind of be the same type of election to really get an accurate number.
Representative Brennan.
Thank you. Is it appropriate to say that it would be the Clerks Association's position that something like this would generally increase efficiency? And is that not something that is very important to the state of New Hampshire, that our elections are run efficiently?
So for the pre-processing, just to verify, there's there's positives and negatives for it with the clerks. I know that some clerks have reported significant costs for pre-processing as well. So to take on that burden for a larger community that may need to rent a space, it was tens of thousands of dollars for the pre-processing, for the staff, the time, the space rental. So there's positives and negatives to both, and that's why we kind of believe that it should be a decision for the municipality on what they want to do.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Prudhoe O'Brien.
Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. Thank you for being here. It's always great to hear from you and hear about the association as well. Do you think it would make sense and it would be prudent to wait and see? We don't know how much people want to absentee vote in 2024 until after 2024. And then we'll understand if that trend has continued and people want to do it, because I agree 2020 was very unusual. Do you think that would be prudent?
My opinion on that is I want to stick with the option. I think having the option for clerks is probably still the best. Depending on the numbers, the clerk can decide to do it or not to do it based on what they receive for absentees. So I wouldn't hold off on the bill, but our position kind of still is of the option.
Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to testify? I don't see any further red slips here. Seeing no one interested in testifying at this point, I am going to close the public hearing at 10:45.
Take back over.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and we're back. I'm going to open up the notice executive session for the House Election Law Committee. We will recess the executive session for, how long would you like, Representative Lane, for your caucus? 15 minutes? Okay, we will reconvene at 11 o'clock for a brief executive session because I have to go to work. So. All right, see you at 11. Okay, are we ready? I'm going to reopen the publicly noticed executive session for the House Election Law Committee. We'll start with Senate Bill 534 relative to campaign finance. I will recess Senate Bill 534. I will tell you what's going to happen with this. Representative Lane is going to get we only have, these are our last two bills that we have. I'm not going to bring the committee back for to exec one bill because that would be ridiculous. So what Representative Lane is going to do is she's going to prepare an amendment. She'll circulate it to me, and I will send it to you via the clerk and myself. And we'll do one of those either during lunch or during our post session. We'll do a quick exec on the amendment, so that way no one has to drive to Concord for one bill. Yes, Representative Muirhead.
I think Representative Alexander has volunteered to get lunch for the committee
Oh yes, I think he did.
at our
Yeah.
lunchtime.
Yeah, I only eat Chop House, so good luck. All right, so now we will open up the executive session for Senate Bill 537, allowing the pre-processing of absentee ballots. Representative Lane is recognized for a motion.
I recommend ought to pass.
Is there a second? Representative Brendan seconds. Is there any discussion on the bill? Hearing none, clerk will call the roll. Oh, sorry. Would you like to speak?
No. what's-
Okay. The motion is ought to pass from Representative Lane. Okay.
I'm glad that Representative Rafter brought up what he did about the different treatment of different voters, which is something that went through my mind as I watched this process in 2020, which was a good thing in 2020, but I was concerned about that when it was happening. And I'm also not sure that we're going to have as much of a need in the future, and I will revisit this in the future if that's the case, but for those reasons, I'll be voting no. So I just wanted to explain that. Thank you.
Further comments from the committee on the recommendation of ought to pass on Senate Bill, I've already forgotten the number, 537. Thank you. Just digging from my sheet, which is, of course, at the very bottom. Any other comments? Hearing none, the clerk will call the roll.
Representative Perdomo Bryan.
No.
Nope.
Oh, wait.
Oh, Quayle.
Quayle.
Representative Quayle, sorry.
It's okay. No.
Representative Perdomo Bryan.
No.
Representative Inkerberg.
No.
Representative Burnham.
No.
Representative Wary.
No.
Representative Wood.
No.
Representative Osborne.
Nope.
Representative Kutab.
No.
Representative Alexander.
No.
Representative Lane.
Yes.
Representative Ward. Representative Hamer.
Yes.
Representative Hamlet.
Yes.
Representative Muirhead. Representative Bay.
Yes.
Representative Brennan.
Yes.
Representative Grill, yes. Representative Howard.
Yes.
Representative Rafter.
Yes.
Chairman Barry.
Chair votes no. With that, the motion of ought to pass fails on a vote of 10 to 10. Representative Quayle is recognized for a new motion.
I move that the committee recommend inexpedient to legislate for SB 537.
Is there a second? Representative Alexander seconds. Is there any discussion on the motion of inexpedient to legislate? Very quickly, this bill is not necessary. It was necessary in 2020. We've opposed bringing in the COVID changes, making them permanent. Even the testimony we heard today could not justify this bill today. I made that point in my questioning. The numbers have gone back to normal. So there is no, I was actually surprised. I thought there would be what I was referring to as a absentee ballot hangover. They usually average around anywhere between 8 to 10%, usually around 10%, depending on the municipality. We've seen them go below 15% again, so we're back to normal. There's no reason to make this election law change. Election day needs to happen on election day. Every time you handle those ballots, it's not even mischievous, it's not malice. It just invites the opportunity for mistakes. People make mistakes. So there's really no reason for this. Making it mandatory it attempts to fix the problem of two classifications of voters. I recognize that. My thing is we could have one classification of voters, one that has their ballot processed on election day. So I did circulate a letter from my city clerk when he called me. Usually, when my city clerk calls me, very, very great city clerk. I think he runs one of the best operations in the state. It is obviously the largest election operation in the state. Normally, when he calls me, we're going to have a very gentlemanly disagreement. And I was stunned when he told me that this was a must-defeat bill because he had spoken to me at length before about why he liked parts about pre-processing. So that's the reason I circulated that letter. When people who have historically asked me to pass something say, "Hey Ross, this isn't the one," then this is not the one. This bill needs a lot of work. So it's not necessary. It needs a lot of work, and it is not universally loved by the clerks. So with that, the clerk will call the roll on the motion of inexpedient to legislate.
Representative Quayle,
Yes.
Representative Perdomo Bryan,
Yes.
Representative Inkerberg,
Yes.
Representative Burnham,
Yes.
Representative Wary,
Yes.
Representative Wood,
Yes.
Representative Osborne,
Yes.
Representative Kutab,
Yes.
Representative Alexander,
Yes.
Representative Lane,
No.
Representative Ward, Representative Hamer,
No.
Representative Hamblett,
No.
Representative Muirhead, Representative Bay,
No.
Representative Brennan,
No.
Representative Grill, no. Representative Howard,
No.
Representative Rafter,
No.
Chairman Barry.
Chair votes yes. With that, the motion of ought to pass, inexpedient to legislate fails on a vote of 10 to 10. I will be responsible for the inexpedient to legislate report. Representative Lane, you'll be responsible for the ought to pass report. Reports are due today at 5. And with that, this will be the last time we meet in notice session. I'll see you guys for the world's hopefully quickest executive session on our final campaign finance vote, which is very fitting that it'll be the last one. So see you guys later. Thanks.